Rosen, Fastcall founder and CEO. It is January 2023, and this is the Fastcall version 8.0. I'm going to talk about inbound call routing, which is a detailed topic, so this recording might be a bit longer than some of the others. And we are going to talk about phone numbers and IVR and other aspects of inbound call routing in other videos and other help guides. So you'll see here I'm looking at Fastcall settings, and we do have user settings, my settings here, and there's some inbound settings here, and then under our admin settings. So let's start here under call handling. There's outbound settings, inbound settings, and we have some of our inbound settings here. So if I start with the basic inbound settings, we can enable voicemail, concurrent calls, enables us to receive another inbound call while we're on a call. Some users don't like this, so it is sometimes enabled. The inbound search, which we are going to talk about in detail, should always be enabled. There's some missed call settings here, pretty self-explanatory. We'll send an email when there's a missed call. We do have a few different ways that we provide notification for missed calls. This is the email setting. We have a phone number search here and a blocked phone numbers here. So the phone number search is where the search is going to happen for an inbound call. When an inbound call arrives, so if we're looking in the application, here's an example of an inbound call. There's a lookup to a record. When that call arrives, we're searching the Salesforce org looking for a matching record, and we're providing them match here and also presenting that when the call is actually ringing. We can have the same search here where I can search for other records, where I can change that inbound lookup. I can also remove the related record. I can block this number. I can remove the interactions. I can edit the contact. I can create a new record. So when that inbound call is arriving, it really all starts with the phone number that we are seeing as the from number on that inbound call. And we are able to either create a lookup to a Salesforce record or enable you to create a Salesforce record. And the specific settings for how all this is set up is I'll get to in a few minutes. So the essence of the inbound call pop is a call arrives. We have the front number. We have an association to different records. Part of that setting is set here. So under the phone number search, we have our search settings where when a call arrives, do you want to use the managed objects list order, which is what we see here? So are we going to search for leads first and then contacts? So if the same phone number exists on both leads and contacts, using this option tells us we'll search the lead first, then the contact. Using this option says, again, if a phone number arrives and if a call arrives and we find the phone on more than one Salesforce record, do we want to go by the last modified date, which sort of makes more sense, and the newest first, or the created date? So these are some tools that are going to allow you to determine the search to help facilitate the search for that inbound call. Under these settings is the actual lookup table, which means here last week in December, a call arrived from this phone number. A lookup relationship was created to this Salesforce record, and it's active. If I happen to have determined that this lookup was wrong, that phone number should not have a lookup relationship to this lead, as an admin, I would just turn this off. So Fastcall maintains a lookup table that's going to remember the association of any phone number that calls and a single Salesforce record, and that can be changed. So they're managed here. Phone number, the search settings are managed here. Block phone numbers, sort of self-explanatory, does something very similar, but enables us to maintain a blocked list. So when the call comes in, if we want to block it, it'll end up on that block list. Okay, so the inbound settings here. So let's talk a little bit about the user says. That's the fundamentals of sort of how the inbound settings are managed. So each individual user is going to have her own inbound settings. And inbound settings can go into two flavors. The user phone is going to follow the user path, which is here. So when this says soft phone, it's going to ring for 45 seconds. When a phone is assigned to an IVR and we're using the ACD, which is automatic call distribution, we are taking a different inbound route, and that is set here. And this has some additional settings and functionality that are set here for the inbound route. So this essentially starts with the user's inbound settings. A phone assigned to a user will be managed here. A phone assigned when that user is in a group, which we talk about again in some other training sessions, will be managed here. Some other basic inbound settings for the user. The user's recorded name, which is used for the employee for the directory. This is a setting that allows the user to delay status before receiving an inbound call, which I'll talk about in a second. Some more specific settings for user phones. The ability to use waiting audio when a user receives a call, which would be something like, "Hi, you've reached the phone of Bob Smith," and also some advanced settings here if you did want to say your caller number one. So these are also settings that you're going to find in the IVR, which we'll talk about in that training session. But these are some settings here for the user, and these are optional. You may have both of these off. Notifications, which I mentioned before, for the user are here. So inbound call, you can play a sound. There's desktop notification. There's Salesforce mobile notification, both for inbound calls, SMS, and missed calls. Our voicemail set up here. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy for the user. Users have devices, and devices can both make outbound calls and receive inbound calls. The Salesforce user record has a mobile phone, which if you have a phone number there, we'll pick that up here. You may have an office phone on the Salesforce user record for the Salesforce profile. If we do find phones on your Salesforce profile, we're going to pick them up here. Otherwise, you can add devices or the user can add devices here under their user settings. So could be an office phone, could be a mobile phone, could be your SIP phone, which you'd set up here. And again, these devices can be used both for outbound calls and inbound calls, but do keep in mind that a device that you have set up for an outbound call isn't necessarily going to receive an inbound call. They are set up individually. When the inbound settings are here, so if I click on soft phone, we can take a device. So I can pick a SIP phone as a device. So once the device is added, I can then add that device to the inbound route. If that makes sense, right? Pretty easy. So what else do we have here? User phones. These are phones that are, and this is a test work, so you probably won't see this many, but phones that are available to that user. Either because the phone is assigned to the user directly or the user belongs to a group. So these are phones that are provisioned, which again, we're going to talk about phones in a different setting. So I have my user's inbound settings, which are managed here. I have my call handling inbound settings that are managed here. Let's talk a little bit about managed objects. We do cover this in a different training module, but briefly, we have settings for individual objects. So for example, if lead is a managed object, which does a few different things, but it does allow us, a managed object can be searchable. So when an inbound call arrives, the managed object can be searchable. If you said, no, we don't want to search for any leads when an inbound call arrives, well, you take this off. Same thing for contact, right? So the managed object, which does a few different things, is here, but one of those things is, do you want to be able to search that object when a call arrives? And that would be managed here. Do you want to be able to create the object here. So as we saw over in the application, the ability to create an object. So those were all managed here. I can make them creatable, editable. The field name, generally it's going to be the name when the call arrives. You generally want to see the name. But depending upon the object, you might want to see a different field when the call arrives, and you would sort of pretty self-explanatory, sort of says that here. So those are managed objects. We are going to talk about the IVR in a different session. The three-way calls we'll talk about in a different session. Training tools are call recording, call coaching, the ability to listen to a call transfer. We'll talk about in a different session. But one other last thing I want to get to, let's see here in phone numbers, we're going to talk about in a different session. But I want to talk about user status. That's right. So user status is also very important for inbound calls. When an inbound call arrives to a user, so right now my user status is busy. So a call arrives to me, it's not going to ring in the application. So this user status is going to determine whether or not I'm able to receive an inbound call in the soft phone in Salesforce. So when my user status is available, I can receive a call. When my user status is not available, or I am on another call, the application is going to route to the next set of instructions, which in some cases is going to be voicemail. It might be another device for overflow. So if I'm ringing the soft phone first, I can overflow a call to, for example, a mobile phone or a desk phone or another user. So all that is sort of managed here in user status. And my user status, by default, there's going to be an available status. There's going to be an offline status. The missed call status is enabled here, but it essentially allows you to log a user out if they are missing calls. So for example, if a user misses, I enable this here, if a user misses 2 or more calls, I can set the status to missed calls, which will tell you that the user was logged out, or the user status was changed, not actually logged out. The user status was changed because that user missed calls. So these are some additional settings here. Always become available after a call, which basically says after the call completes, you want that user to be available. It's generally going to be yes. Do you want to ask the user if they want to become available again? So you'll see that here. So for example, if my user status was offline and I try to make an outbound call, this is just going to say, do you want to ask the user if they want to become available again, which would affect what happens when that call ends. When that call ends, if the user is now available, they can now receive an inbound call. So all should all be somewhat easy to understand and straightforward. But this user status is also important. And of course, I can create a custom user status here, for example, lunch. So, and that user status will affect inbound routing. So we talked about user status. We talked about individual user settings. We talked about all this. We covered all the settings that were listed here for the admin, managed objects, all of our inbound settings here, and things like call recording are again talked about in other sessions and other settings here. So some of these settings will interact or intersect things like call recording, because call recording will affect inbound calls and outbound calls. But we've tried to organize all these settings around inbound, outbound, call logging, which are things that affect logging the call. So that's how we've tried to organize all these things. Okay, so hopefully this session was helpful. As I mentioned, maybe a little bit longer than some of the others. If you have any questions, please open a case in the application here or send an email to help@fastcall.com.